The morning of the 28th of June, 1914, broke over Sarajevo with a deceptive, festive light. Flags snapped in the breeze along the Appel Quay, and the air hummed with the restless energy of a city waiting for a spectacle. In the center of the street, an open-top vehicle rolled forward at a walking pace. Archduke Franz Ferdinand sat upright, looking out at the rows of faces. Beside him, Sophie watched the crowd. For the Archduke, this journey was a hard-won victory against the rigid rules of his court. It was the only time he could stand beside his wife in public. Neither of them looked at the shadows beneath the trees or the faces pressed against the barricades. They did not know that 6 men were scattered along the route, their pockets heavy with grenades and metal. The city felt bright, the morning felt calm, and the car moved steadily toward the heart of the trap. Mohammed Mehmed Bashic stood near the Kamorja bridge, his position fixed. As the motorcade rolled closer, the heavy silence of his own intent pressed against his ears. His hand moved toward his pocket, fingers brushing the cold metal of a grenade. He prepared to step into the street, but a policeman stood just meters away, eyes scanning the line of spectators. The sight of the lawman paralyzed him. His muscles locked. He watched the vehicle glide past, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He remained frozen, a statue in the crowd, while the target drifted away. Further down the line, Vaso Chubrilovich waited. He saw the vehicle approach and raised his pistol, the weight of the weapon suddenly feeling immense. He looked directly at the Archduke. The man in the car looked calm, almost peaceful, and that sight shattered the assassin's resolve. His fingers began to tremble, the grip on the pistol loosening until his arm dropped to his side. He could not pull the trigger. He stepped back, melting into the shadows of the onlookers, watching the motorcade continue its slow, steady progress. 2 opportunities had vanished. Then came Nedeljko Chabrinovich. He stepped forward from the line of spectators, his eyes locked on the royal vehicle as it closed the distance. The air seemed to sharpen. He reached into his pocket, gripped the device, and struck the detonator against a nearby lamppost. A sharp, metallic click echoed in the street. He hurled the object with a desperate, sweeping motion. The driver saw the dark, tumbling shape arc through the air and slammed his foot onto the accelerator. The engine roared. The car lurched forward, and the grenade struck the folded roof. It bounced off the canvas, skittering across the pavement like a stone on ice. A second later, it detonated under the following car. The blast wave shattered windows and sent debris spraying across the road. Chaos erupted instantly. The festive hum of the crowd dissolved into a wall of screaming. Thick, acrid smoke billowed into the street. Bystanders scrambled, tripping over one another as they fled the center of the road. The motorcade stalled in the confusion, trapped behind the wreckage. Nedeljko Chabrinovich did not wait for the smoke to clear. He pulled the small vial from his pocket, uncorked it, and swallowed the contents in one frantic gulp. He waited for the darkness of death to take him, but the poison was stale, its potency long since evaporated. Instead of silence, he felt only a burning in his throat and a wave of nausea. He vaulted over the stone embankment, plunging into the river below, hoping the water would hide his body. He hit the shallow, muddy bottom with a bone-jarring thud. He began to retch, his body convulsing as the useless chemical churned in his stomach. Police officers swarmed the bank, their boots thudding against the stone. They reached down, grabbed him by the arms, and hauled him from the muck like a common thief. He coughed, gasping for air, his face smeared with river silt. Above him, the motorcade engines roared back to life. The drivers steered around the wreckage, accelerating toward the town hall. The remaining assassins watched the royal vehicle disappear into the distance, their resolve crumbling. They turned and slipped into the labyrinth of side streets, convinced their mission had ended in total failure. The city began to settle, the immediate threat seemingly neutralized, while the Archduke continued his journey, unaware that the true danger had only just begun to shift. Inside the town hall, the doors swung shut, muffling the distant echoes of the blast. The Archduke stood before the local officials, his face flushed a deep, mottled red. He did not sit. He paced the small perimeter of the room, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. The reception was a hollow performance. Officials offered scripted apologies, their voices thin and trembling against the heavy, suffocating silence of the room. Every tick of the wall clock seemed to amplify the Archduke's mounting frustration. He ignored the pleas for caution. He wanted to see the victims of the explosion. He demanded the itinerary be changed immediately. The officials exchanged worried glances, but the Archduke's resolve was absolute. He turned on his heel and marched toward the exit. The car pulled away from the curb, accelerating into the city streets, carrying the royal couple toward their final, unforeseen destination. The motorcade moved with a deceptive, steady pace. The lead driver, unfamiliar with the city and the sudden change in plans, kept his eyes fixed on the familiar path. He missed the signal to veer toward the hospital and instead swung the heavy vehicle onto Franz Josef Street. The error was realized seconds later. The driver slammed his foot onto the brake pedal, the tires skidding against the cobblestones with a sharp, high-pitched screech. The engine sputtered, coughed once, and then fell completely silent. The sudden absence of the motor's hum left an eerie, heavy stillness in the air. The car sat motionless, a stationary target in the middle of the narrow street. Just feet away, at a small sidewalk café, Gavrilo Princip sat with his head buried in his hands. He was mourning the failure of his morning. His shoulders slumped in defeat. The sound of the screeching tires forced him to look up. His eyes widened. The royal vehicle was idling less than 2 meters from his table. The Archduke and his wife were sitting in the open car, completely exposed, trapped by the mechanical failure. The world seemed to hold its breath. Princip stared, his pulse hammering in his ears, realizing that the opportunity he had abandoned had just arrived at his feet. Princip stood so abruptly that his chair toppled backward, striking the pavement with a sharp, metallic crack. The sound cut through the street like a blade. He did not hesitate. His hand moved to his pocket, fingers closing around the cold steel of the pistol. He pulled it free, his arms snapping straight, leveling the barrel at the idling vehicle. The Archduke turned his head, eyes locking onto the weapon, but there was no time to shout. Princip pulled the trigger. The first shot cracked through the air, a violent, deafening report that sent birds scattering from the rooftops. The bullet tore through the air and struck Sophie in the abdomen. She gasped, her body jerking forward. Before the echo could fade, Princip fired again. The second shot pierced the Archduke's neck. The force of the impact snapped his head back against the seat. The street, which had been still only a heartbeat before, erupted into a frenzy of motion. Princip stood frozen for a fraction of a second, the smoking weapon still in his grip, as the weight of what he had done began to settle over the square. Sophie slumped sideways, her weight pulling against the Archduke. He did not recoil from the blood spreading across his own neck. Instead, he leaned into her, his hands gripping her shoulders to keep her upright. The world around them was a blur of shouting voices and running feet, but he seemed deaf to the panic. He pressed his face close to hers, his breath coming in shallow, ragged hitches. His eyes searched her face, his gaze fixed and desperate. He reached out, his fingers trembling as he brushed a stray lock of hair from her forehead. He spoke, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that barely cut through the roar of the crowd. "Sophie, don't die," he whispered, the words straining against the damage in his throat. "Stay alive for our children," he repeated the plea, his grip tightening for a fleeting second. Before his strength began to ebb, the light in his eyes flickered, dimming as the life drained from his body. He held her until his muscles finally gave way, his head dropping toward her shoulder. The chaos of the street rushed in, the sounds of the struggle to restrain the assassin rising to a deafening pitch. The shots did not merely end 2 lives, they shattered the foundation of a continent. Austria-Hungary demanded retribution, and the gears of a massive, pre-existing machine began to grind. Russia mobilized its forces. Germany, France, and Britain followed, pulled into a conflict they could no longer halt or control. The irony was absolute. The man who had sought to reform the empire and grant autonomy to the Slavs was killed by those who feared his success. The peace that had held Europe together for decades evaporated in a matter of weeks. Armies marched, borders shifted, and the industrial capacity of nations turned toward total destruction. By the time the guns finally fell silent years later, 4 empires had vanished from the map. 20 million people were dead. It all hinged on a series of impossible accidents. A driver who did not understand a command, A wrong turn onto a narrow street, a stalled engine that turned a moving target into a stationary one, and a young man who had given up, only to look up at the exact moment history demanded a witness. The world was set ablaze by the convergence of these small, fatal errors, proving that the course of human history can be altered by the smallest, most unpredictable of turns.